5 years ago, for International Women's Day 2015, I gave a talk about a military hospital run entirely by women. I later repeated that talk at the Swiss church in Covent Garden, which was opposite the site of that hospital. Now, the conventional view we have of women in medicine and healthcare in the Great War is of them taking a very traditionally feminine role. Sewing bees, making bed linen and rolling bandages for the hospitals. Very much that approach was epitomised by Queen Mary's ceaseless needlework, punctuated by her awkward hospital visits. In other cases, there would be volunteers helping out at such war hospitals as the Manor House Hospital in Hampstead, or raising money for the Red Cross and St John's Ambulance and other war charities. In other cases, women would be acting as nurses, either as fully trained nurses or as VADs, voluntary aid detachments. Perhaps the best known of these VADs is Vera Brittain, who commented on the suspicion of regular nurses towards the young, semi-trained amateurs upon whose assistance they were beginning to realise with dismay that they would be obliged to depend upon for the duration of the war. Now, the response of many regular trained nurses was similar to that of the trade unions during the war, who objected to the employment of women in factories or on buses because they saw it as a dilution of labour. What I think is often forgotten about is the contribution made by women doctors. This is something which people tend to really ignore in many of the conventional accounts, yet it was vitally important. At Endell Street in Covent Garden, opposite the Swiss church, and next to a gym, there's a plaque set up to commemorate the Endell Street Military Hospital, which occupied the former buildings of the St Giles Union Workhouse, which had once been on the site. This hospital opened in May 1915 and was in operation until December 1919. The plaque goes on to claim that this 573-bed hospital was the only British Army hospital to have been staffed entirely by women. It's quite a major claim, but it's not 100% accurate. We only have to think of the work of such pioneering women doctors as Elsie Ingalls, who was told at the outbreak of the war to go home and attend to her knitting. She set up her own hospital unit, the Scottish Women Hospitals. Or we can consider Mabel Sinclair Stobbart, who became a heroine for the hospitals she organised in Serbia and He was influential in not only treating the wounded, but also in the retreat of the Serbian army. And there was one major hospital in France that was staffed by women. Royaumont. It had one of the lowest infection rates of all the military hospitals near to the battlefields, and it was a hospital that wounded soldiers longed to be sent to. They were pleased to be treated by very confident and competent women doctors. The Princess Royal is a great fan of the work that was done at Royaumont, or at least that was what she said in a conversation we had about hospital infections. But the Endell Street Hospital, as you'll find out, does have a unique claim in the history of the women's movement. But you'll have to wait to find out what it was. Endell Street had been set up by two quite remarkable women doctors, Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson, daughter of the redoubtable Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, pioneer of women's medical education. It was staffed by the Women's Hospital Corps. In 1914, the inseparable Murray and Garrett Anderson had set up a military hospital in Claridge's Hotel in Paris, described as a gorgeous shell of marble and gilt, without heating or crockery or anything practical. But by dint of mild militancy and unending push, things have advanced immensely. They set up an operating theatre in the child women's toilets. Garrett Anderson considered this to be a great achievement, and she said, "After years of unpopularity over the suffrage, it is very exhilarating to be on top of the wave, while all the time we are doing suffrage work or women's work in another form. I wish the care of the wounded could be put in the hands of women. This is not military work. It is merely a matter of organisation, common sense, attention to detail, and a determination to avoid unnecessary suffering and loss of life." Garrett Anderson and Murray then went on to set up a hospital at Vimere. This was short-lived, and the staff and a lot of the equipment was soon to be transferred to a new hospital being set up in the requisitioned premises of the St Giles Union Workhouse. Murray and Garrett Anderson were placed in charge of this new hospital, which was staffed by the Women's Hospital Corps. Its motto was "Deeds, not words," the motto of the Women's Social and Political Union, the motto of the suffragette movement, or at least of the militant suffragette movement, as there were many different strands within the cause of women's emancipation. It was drilled into all the staff that they had to be better than the men. was thought that it wasn't good enough to just be the equal of men. They had to prove themselves to be more. To some visitors, such as the jingoistic journalists and warmongers J.L. Gavin and John Bull, a hospital run by women was unthinkable. On a visit, they asked the question, but who operates when seriously wounded casualties are brought in? The answer, the women surgeons, naturally. Murray was in charge of the medical side of the hospital as doctor in charge, and Garrett Anderson as chief surgeon. There were 15 women doctors, 36 nurses, 80 orderlies, clerks, cooks, cleaners, storekeepers, a quartermaster, all of them women. In addition, there was a detachment of 21 men of the Royal Army Medical Corps, but their role was subsidiary to that of the all-female staff. Initially, the hospital had 520 beds, but this was soon raised to 573. And between May 1915 and December 1919, there were 26,000 patients and over 7,000 operations performed. The staff were very conscious that they should not appear too feminine, although in fact one of the charms of the hospital for its patients was in many ways the feminine care and cheerfulness of the hospital. There was a lot of criticism of a painting by the war artist Austin Short of an operation. In it, he showed a kneeling figure of a nurse, a couch, Thomas splint, and sterilising drums on the theatre floor. Items which would indicate a serious professional breach of the most ordinary surgical practice. Garrett Anderson objected to it. There's also an objection for the hospital to be depicted in paintings with flowers in the background. They didn't want feminine touches. Yet, a photograph of one of the doctors there, Dr. Winifred Buckley, shows her sitting at her desk with flowers on it. Garrett Anderson was very insistent that Endell Street should be exactly like every other military hospital, but not like other hospitals run by non-professional women. She was very scathing about some of the war hospitals run by members of the aristocracy, playing at being nurses. Many of them were VADs, but due to their social status, considered themselves to be the matron. It's a contrast to Princess Arthur of Connaught, niece of the king and wife of his cousin, who actually trained as a nurse at St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, insisting on going through the full course of training and the examinations. And for her, it was an opportunity to make a career in nursing, not like some ladies who just saw it as a hobby. Indeed, Princess Arthur was once reprimanded for revealing too much when bending over in the ward. An uncle, one presumes. As well as being critical of these voluntary society hospitals, Garrett Anderson was also scathing about the attitude, the hostile and obstructive attitude of the War Office to a hospital run and staffed by women doctors. In her view, she and her colleagues could have done much more if they'd been given more sympathetic consideration, more help, and just being recognised as doing a good job. Her attitude to her patients was almost to treat them like children. After all, she said, if you have found out the way to treat children, what toys they like, what they like for tea, and what frightens them when going for an operation, you've gone a great way to find out how to run a military hospital. Endell Street had 550 large babies requiring a great deal of care, a great deal of understanding, and a certain amount of treatment. It was said that the hospital had a distinctive atmosphere. It was cheerful, sympathetic, and homely, unlike many of the other military hospitals abroad and at home. It had an atmosphere of gentleness. The wards were not indicated by the usual army practice of A, B, C, D, E, F. Instead, they were given the names of women's saints. The blankets and bed linen were cheerful. Screens were colourful and floral even. There were flowers everywhere. And a homely atmosphere. Being close to the West End, it was possible to have visits to raise the morale of the wounded men from stars of the West End, such as the Gaiety Girls. Queen Alexandra, an indefatigable hospital visitor and patron of many charities, paid a visit to the hospital to show her approval. And the men themselves were proud of their doctors, their women doctors. They preferred Endell Street to much more conventional military hospitals. One man wrote, I got hit by a shell bursting over our trench, in the face, neck and shoulder. I'm in one of the very best of hospitals, a ladies' hospital. Ladies' doctors do all the work, no men at all. So you can guess I'm all right. Some young soldiers, being very macho, didn't want women doctors. But one of them who objected at first on being sent to Endell Street, a military hospital run by women, later cried to stay. Endell Street Hospital has been described as a triumph for women and incidentally as a triumph for suffragettes. Many of the staff, including Murray and Garrett Anderson, were themselves militant suffragettes. On the 6th of February 1918, the Representation of the People Act was passed, and the flag of the Women's Social and Political Union, the suffragette flag, was raised in triumph above the hospital. And that is perhaps what was really distinctive about Endell Street. It wasn't that it was the only hospital run by women, the only military hospital. It was that it was the only military hospital run by suffragettes.